Hi, I am Sarah, and welcome back to our channel. This is not just another war story. This is a moment that could redefine global power, reshape alliances, and determine whether the world moves toward stability or deeper uncertainty. In recent weeks, headlines have been dominated by one question: is the Iran war a historic victory or a dangerous illusion? Political leaders have called it decisive, critics have called it catastrophic, and analysts across the world remain divided. Tonight, we go beyond the headlines. We examine the facts, the claims, the contradictions, and the consequences, because the truth is more complex than either side is willing to admit. Part 1: The debate that shook the narrative. The global conversation intensified after a high-profile televised debate. On one side, voices arguing that decisive action was necessary to prevent a nuclear threat. On the other, critics questioning the legality, strategy, and long-term consequences. The core issue was clear. Was this war about stopping a nuclear program or something far more complex? Supporters of the intervention argued that waiting would have been too dangerous. They warned that nuclear capability in the wrong hands could reshape global security overnight. Their position was simple: act now or face consequences later. But critics pushed back strongly. They questioned whether military force actually prevents nuclear development or accelerates it. They pointed to past agreements, broken negotiations, and unintended consequences, and they raised a critical concern. If a nation feels threatened, does it become more likely or less likely to pursue nuclear deterrence? Part 2: The nuclear question. At the center of the conflict lies one of the most sensitive issues in modern geopolitics: nuclear capability. For decades, concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions have shaped international policy. Sanctions, negotiations, and agreements were all attempts to control escalation. One of the most significant agreements, the nuclear deal, was designed to limit enrichment levels and ensure transparency. Supporters argued it worked. Critics argued it didn't go far enough. When that agreement collapsed, tensions began to rise again. And now, after military escalation, the situation has become even more uncertain. Some intelligence assessments have suggested that Iran was not actively building a nuclear weapon at certain points. Others argue that capability, not intent, is what matters, because once the capability exists, the timeline to weaponization becomes dangerously short. Part 3: The war itself. The military campaign was fast, intense, and highly strategic. Targets included infrastructure, missile systems, and nuclear-related facilities. Supporters describe the operation as precise and effective. They argue that key capabilities were significantly degraded, but critics question whether setbacks are permanent. History suggests that destroyed infrastructure can be rebuilt, knowledge cannot be erased, and motivation, especially under pressure, can intensify. Another key issue: the enriched uranium, because regardless of military success, one question remains unresolved: where is it? Without securing or neutralizing that material, many experts argue the mission remains incomplete. Part 4: The Strait of Hormuz factor. Beyond military action, the conflict has triggered a global economic dimension. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil transit routes in the world, has become a strategic pressure point. Any disruption here doesn't just affect one country. It affects global energy markets. Prices fluctuate, supply chains tighten, and economic uncertainty spreads far beyond the region. Some analysts argue that this gives Iran a powerful non-military tool, a way to exert influence without direct confrontation. In modern warfare, economic leverage can be just as impactful as military strength. Part 5: The Battle of Narratives. One of the most striking aspects of this conflict is not just what is happening on the ground, but what is being said about it. Different narratives are competing for global acceptance. One narrative frames the war as a necessary preemptive action, another frames it as a destabilizing escalation, and in between are millions of people trying to understand what is actually true. Public opinion is shifting. In some regions, support remains strong. In others, skepticism is growing. This divide is not just political, it's informational, because in modern conflicts, perception is part of the battlefield. Part 6: Military Analysis: Success or Stalemate. From a purely military perspective, the situation is complex. There have been tactical successes, command structures disrupted, capabilities reduced, but strategic victory is harder to define because modern wars are not won in weeks. They unfold over years, sometimes decades. One key factor: time. Some experts believe that Iran has a longer tolerance for sustained pressure, while Western governments face political cycles, public scrutiny, and economic constraints. This creates an asymmetry, not just in weapons, but in endurance. Part 7: The Regime Question. A major assumption behind the conflict was the possibility of internal change. That pressure could lead to instability, and instability could lead to transformation. But so far, that outcome has not materialized. The leadership structure remains intact. There has been no large-scale internal uprising, and in some cases, external pressure can strengthen internal cohesion rather than weaken it. This raises a critical question. Can external force reshape internal politics, or does it reinforce existing systems? Part 8: Global Consequences. The implications of this conflict extend far beyond one region. Allies are reassessing strategies, neutral countries are watching closely, and global institutions are facing renewed pressure. The risk is not just escalation between two nations, but a chain reaction. Regional conflicts can expand, economic shocks can ripple outward, and diplomatic relationships can shift rapidly. In an interconnected world, no conflict exists in isolation. Part 9: The Core Question. After weeks of conflict, analysis, and debate, we return to the central question: has the objective been achieved? If the goal was to delay nuclear capability, some progress may have been made. If the goal was to eliminate it entirely, the answer remains unclear. If the goal was long-term stability, the outcome is still unfolding, because in geopolitics, outcomes are rarely immediate. They are measured over time. Here is the conclusion. This is not a story with a simple ending. It is a developing situation, one that will continue to evolve in the months and years ahead. What we know is this: military action has changed the landscape, but it has not resolved the underlying tensions. The nuclear question remains, the regional dynamics remain, and the global implications are still unfolding. History will ultimately decide how this moment is remembered, as a turning point toward stability or a step toward greater uncertainty. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe, because in a world of fast headlines and competing narratives, understanding the full picture has never been more important. Stay informed, stay critical, and we'll see you in the next investigation. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. It is based on publicly available information, expert commentary, and historical context. The video does not promote violence or endorse any political position.